This translation, if I may borrow Walter Benjamin's formula, was, however, not to petrify anyone anywhere. On the contrary, you made a very convincing claim of the permanent work of ideological reproduction on our dreams and of autonomy and emancipation. This Althuserian claim about the unrecognized embodied work of ideological reproduction is, on one hand, the element that connects your work with that of Judith Butler, with whom you not only co-authored the amazing book Who Sings the Nation State, but also, I think, shared the birth date with some small years of difference, which is
14 years.
Oh, okay.
A lot of
That's not many. So I was much less lucky, as I shared the birth date with Jean-Paul Sartre only, so that's not very exciting, and Lana Del Rey, which is
also the 1848 revolution.
There we go. That's much better. In the later versions of your essay, however, you decided to emphasize the paradoxical and provocative nature of your statement, and this led to introducing question marks and doubts as to how to subsume the subject's positionality in the discussions of women colonized others. In your later work, you turned to education, critique of municipal United Nations structured feminism of white Western women who try to, I quote, save brown women from the hands of brown men. Your work in Africa and India, the two examples of developing the colonized regions still kept in the position of dependency by the hegemonic West, mainly focuses on education and women's rights. In the recent years, your focus became education and aesthetics. However, the debates over the subject, hegemony, and post-colonial critique remain at the core of your work. As the time is running, I will just give two titles of books and a couple of articles that you should consider reading. So Outside in the Teaching Machine, published by Routledge in 2009, but earlier in 1993. Then also The Critique of Postcolonial Reason Towards a History of Vanishing Present by Harvard University Press, 1999. And then articles which I think are amazingly interesting. So Translator's Preface in Of Grammatology by Jacques Derrida, of course, Three Women's Texts, and A Critique of Imperialism from 1985. Can the Subaltern Speak, already mentioned in 88. Then A Note on the New International by Parallax in 2001. And The Politics of Translation, which is part of Outside in the Teaching Machine, and which is an incredibly important work in the context of translation studies. It was a pleasure and honor to introduce you once again to the audience in Poland, and please, let's all welcome once again Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, who will now give us the keynote lecture for the 5th Marxist-Feminist International Conference entitled Women in Primitive Accumulation. Thank you, Gayatri, for coming to Warsaw. The floor is now yours.
Wonderfully generous introduction. Thank you very much. It's always hard to speak after a generous introduction because when I'm introduced by men, especially white guys, because of course, unfortunately, since I'm a Europeanist, I've grown up fighting them, right? So those introductions, and also mechanical Marxists at home, because we did have for a long time. I mean, I actually come from, like some of you here, from an actually existing socialist state, right, West Bengal, and they had problems. But at any rate, when they are introducing me, I really can talk well, because those are completely dismissive introductions. I mean, like, I'm sorry, I'm obliged to introduce this person. Is that kind of a thing? But when people are generous, I'm so used to hostility. I get.
Next time I have to.
Sometimes we have to imitate men. But let me say that I have this picture because I want very much to emphasize how much I'm with you folks because of Frigga. This is the reason why I was laughing with Heidi and with Eva, that, I wasn't invited here. I was just notified that the Congress was taking place. I immediately wrote an email saying, oh, good, I'll be there and this is what I'll say. That's not the way, I'm a person with some institutional power. That's not how I go places. But this one, I come on my own. So isn't this true? And I used to give enormous amounts of money from my research fund, not my pocket. But at any rate, so, I feel this is the only European thing with which I actually work. It's not, I'm sorry I'm leaving tomorrow, but I'm very broadly spread out, unfortunately. Private sector voluntarism, which I don't approve of, but on the other hand, you can't always keep your hands clean. So therefore, the fact that I come here is because of Frigga Haug, because I really appreciate her work, and also we can talk to each other, or we don't always agree, but I know that I can say what I have to say, and she knows she can say what she has to say. And it is, if I may say so, I'm not a racist, but on the other hand, I have to say what I say because of my life experience. I was born in British India. I'm that old. So it's very unusual for me to be able to work that well with a white woman. This is also something quite unusual for me. And it's so therefore, I just want you to know that really I do this thing because, of course, all of you, etc., but there is also this real feeling that perhaps we can do something together, Frigga and I. We're almost the same age. So there we go. That's why I wanted to put the picture up. And she quite properly asked all of us, but also me, to look at the theses and see what we want to contribute. Now, I think one of the first things that I have said to Frigga, and I continue to do so, is that this has to be decentralized. I'm here and I think Frigga actually approves of it, at least in principle. Hey, what happened to my thing?
Which thing?
This.
Nothing.
We didn't play?
We didn't.
Okay.
But we can
play it now.
Yes. So, okay. So, as a digression, we have a political sound installation that we'll try to play via the microphone.
Okay. David Palumbo Leo asked me to make a little thing, let's see if the microphone picks it up, okay? A little 42-second.
Angola and Vietnam.
Can you hear?
So too will Palestine be.
This is not me.
Palestinians are on the right side of history. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
The next voice we hear is that of Gayatri Spivak.
It is not just a question of private suffering. Imagine with your heart a people displaced from their millennial home for no reason at all, and then subjected to oppression, repression, domination, exploitation, torture, and now genocide collectively, and misquote June Jordan, as I do. I was born an Indian woman, and now am Palestinian. See, her poem, she says, I was born a black woman, but now I imagine myself a Palestinian. And that's such a powerful line. I mean, that's real translation. You know what I mean? And I'm a translation person. So I just wanted to play.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me use this opportunity to invite all of you who would like to join this hashtag. The hashtag says ceasefire. Come join us here after the keynote, and we will take a bigger picture with these hashtags and share it
And remember, to want a ceasefire is actually, it's just a disguised name for something a ceasefire is not. Peace. Peace is not just stopping firing. This is something that we have to remember, even as we are obliged to ask, not for a 4-hour space, but a ceasefire. That's not appropriate. What is really appropriate is the stopping of war and going toward peace. And how is that done? Part of it, one can say, this is not part of my talk, one can say that it's done. I'll just stop when I stop, okay? I'll tell you what my structure is, and you can, there will be Q&A. So part of what I talk about is the education, inclusive education of children. I'll come to it because what children have to do is to develop the democratic intuitions as habits. Talking at children in a very nice childy-wildy way does not work. I've been working with extremely poor children now for 40 years, teaching and training teachers from those communities to new teachers, women teachers. And I prefer women teachers, obviously. These women teachers, they have never been, can you imagine, it's just 2 hours to Calcutta, where I go. They've never been to Calcutta because they're so poor that the train station is 40 kilometers away. There's no way they will go 40 kilometers. So to an extent, imagining the fact that they are intelligent, they're imaginative, they're really excited that I take them seriously, you realize that you teach children the habits. I mean, it's very hard to teach extremely poor children that democracy is other people through behavior rather than telling them this, that, and the third thing. And one of the problems about the inclusive teaching of children is that the European model, especially with migrants, I'm sure you don't make that mistake, but it needs to be said, we go toward, I mean, this middle-class, liberal European picture of the child, which has been much criticized. So we are hugging them to our bosoms and we are singing and we are art therapy is something else. I'm not talking about therapy. And we are making pictures. That's that definition, you know, Montessori and so on. That definition is so liberal middle class, I cannot tell you. When I see people teach, especially teaching migrant children who are, and then children of the kind that I confront, you know, with those middle class values of a figure of a child that's completely unreal, that I feel that none of this business of bringing peace, wanting peace, not wanting war, not wanting to compete on the other hand at the same time, wanting the class struggle. These are all training desires and habits in small children, okay? Not telling children, oh, you know, we really must love everyone. No, because the general human affect is fear, violence, and greed. And children are born that way, although we think they're just wonderful. But if you really want to train, you have to dehumanize, because the human is fearful, violent, and greedy. So if you're a teacher of as much experience as I, you kind of know this. Most teachers who have experience do know this. So at any rate, I just wanted to say that to want ceasefire is not... To want ceasefire, okay, he's on the phone, because I thought he was leaving because I said bad things about children. I am so intellectually insecure because of the fact that I was born, my mother was my parents were wonderful proto-feminists. They always beat me because they said, you're a genius. If you go bad, you will really go bad. So that was like very solid proto-feminist behavior. That was not child abuse. They never hit me hard, and also they never hit me on the head, because I'm a genius, right? But at any rate, so I had this at home. But once I entered a co-educational university, I was constantly told that the reason why I got good grades was because I was good looking. The really brilliant person was a guy who's now dead. But nonetheless, see, that made me so, and so this university professorship, I think of it, well, I was being tokenized, no doubt. Because of this treatment, this tremendously sexist treatment at university, I'm still intellectually insecure. Guy leaves with a phone in his ear, and I think he's leaving because he doesn't like what I'm saying. See, there goes another one. So anyway, let's get to my talk. So what I was saying was that Frida is someone with whom I can actually air my differences. And the first one that I wanted to emphasize was decentralization. You know why I'm very happy I've come to this sentence? I'm 81 years old. Short-term memory is still working, because that's exactly where I was. Decentralization, was I not? Okay, good. So, it's a test for myself. One is testing oneself all the time. Am I okay, or am I going towards dementia? Anyway, so decentralization. There is also a change in that the idea of defining and determining for us is not always helpful, because once you define, you go on defining as you're practicing, but once you define a definition which you're going to follow, what happens is the cognitive field becomes narrow. There are, in order to have a definition, so we think of defining and determining not as goals, but as methodological necessities. You can't move forward without having some kind of a definition. But once, to establish from that point of view, I would say Marx and Engels were writing, and remember how many times Engels revised the damn theses, because he didn't really understand how counterfactual, how counterintuitive Marx was. Not counterfactual so much as counterintuitive. And I will say, whoever said, my friend there, who did give me my full name, that the communist, the 11th thesis doesn't tell you to forget interpreting. It says, es kommt darauf an, sie zu verändern. Interpretation requires this. In order to complete interpretation, you must. So that's where I'm at with the definition business. So and Marx did not call this thing revolution. He called it, especially third thesis, education, Umwälzung, not revolution. Old Engels changes it, revolution. So the thing is, the education itself, educating the educators, third thesis. This is, if one really looks at Marx, one will see that, remember what he said to Zasulich. He said, finally, after 6 responses, 6 drafts of responses, long ones, he said to her, I don't know how to answer you. You must work this out yourself. How to change a place like Russia, full of peasant communes, into the Marxist model without going through. That was her question to Citizen Marx, as she wrote, not Comrade yet. But he actually really worked hard on the answer. But the final answer was, I don't know how to answer you. You must work it out yourself. So that, and this is one of the reasons why, for example, my friend, very close friend, 3 months younger than I, but with him also I can disagree, Etienne Balibar, why he thinks that the Marx can't be followed because he rectifies himself too often. This is in his printed little book on the philosophy of Marxism. I think that's his strength. You see, and that's where this definition business comes. Yes, you need the Communist Manifesto. See, I'm not following my damn thing at all, so this is going to be very sad. I may not come to, that'll be very, very sad, to, primitive accumulation, but I will make myself do so. Okay, so to go back to the Communist Manifesto, as you know, the 1872 revision, and Maria Domar has heard me say this before, and I'm sure many of you have, but it's worth repeating. The 1872 edition, which is readily available, it's not an esoteric thing that you find in libraries. In the introduction, they write that the whole first part about revolution is no longer just veraltet. It's no longer useful because of the way big business, they use that word, because of the way big business has gone for the last 25 years, 1848, 1872, the way big business has gone the last 25 years. We are only including it because this book this manifesto has become an iconic manifesto. But you can ignore that part. They themselves write this. Does anyone pay any attention to them? And in fact, I don't want to go into how the manifesto was written, because then I will get into one of my favorite subjects, and you will never hear anything about primitive accumulation at all. But so I would say that in my discussion about the theses, I would say that the time for a thesis, which is a positing, a Satz, a time, and although Frigga is very aware, and for this I congratulate her, and I'm with her, that you have to produce negations of these theses. The dialectic requires a negation and a negation of a negation. This, we are old-fashioned Marxists, both of us, in many ways, and this is something that saves us from just having theses. And to an extent, her request to all of us for introducing things that will contradict the thesis is the request for positive contradictions. And this is something this is not just theoretical. This is something that you absolutely have to remember when you accuse. When you accuse, you have to remember you're complicit. You have to remember you're complicit. It's not, that's another thing that I bring to this, turning, you see, like I say to people, I pay income tax in the United States of America. So in what way can I claim any kind of revolutionary activism? How many cents in the dollar go from the taxes, go for the defense budget? Blood on my hands. Complicit. Unless you know this to be the case, complicity being folded together. And so this idea that we will only oppose is not going to get us anywhere. And I think Frigga is very aware of this as well. But the idea of the definition and the determining, why is it that I go against it? It's also because we have to remember that practice norms theory, this is not just my idea, it's the idea of Foucault's teacher, Canguilhem. Anytime you do something, theory, because practice is also a kind of theorizing. Anybody who's really engaged in actually doing things rather than talking about doing things, and most of you are doing things, even if you haven't perhaps said it, that the practice produces a kind of theorizing while you're practicing. And that's what actually norms theory. So we don't define in order to apply definitions. because that actually breaks the cognitive, makes the cognitive field narrower, makes it existentially impoverished. So that's one of my first statements. Let us not think always of determining and producing definitions. And remember, I'm a teacher. I became a card-carrying tenure track assistant professor in the fall of 1965. That's a very long time. So therefore, I'm speaking out of and I teach very far below, way below the NGO radar, and also in European stuff and American stuff at Columbia University. So I don't teach South Asia there. I'm not a native informant. But so therefore, the idea of what happens in teaching, I'm not a good teacher, but I'm an experienced teacher. This is something that comes to me. Do not teach them to define, to go towards a definition, etc. And one of the wonderful changes that you have made is, of course, going toward migrants and refugees. And there is a wonderful, I'm told by Czeslaw, I haven't seen it yet, a wonderful exposition on refugees, right? I hope this evening I'll have time to look at it very quickly. What I have been talking about, though, for a very long time is that we have to have a holistic view of the situation of migrants and refugees. It's not enough, although it's wonderful. It's wonderful given the way they're killed and refused and turned back. It's wonderful to welcome them. It's wonderful to educate the children. It's wonderful to find ways that this is happening in New York now. But nonetheless, for a Marxist feminist, the real project is to see why this kind of Europe-centered migration takes place. So, and unless one takes all of that into consideration, and finally the issue for everything that Marxists do, feminist Marxists among them, finally the issue is redistribution. Redistribution is the final issue. And also, in order for this to take place, this is also something that I add, the change, Gramsci knew that for Marx's project, one needs an epistemological change. Gramsci was a little more, he was, his class fix was different from ours. So he calls it, and it's the Italian word anyway, gnosiological rather than epistemological. Although in the English translation it's epistemological. But a change is required in how we know, what we know, and how we know ourselves as knowers, and the other as someone to whom we will give knowledge. This model, vanguardism, is not something that you can happily inhabit if you really think that people will want to join and become global. See, what happens, we must develop a desire in other people to work with us. Because again and again, and I'm sure Frigga is as unhappy about this as I am, there are promises made that things will be done, and then this statement comes, but this has not happened yet. Why has this not happened yet? It's not like you don't do things, because that's the new international that you spoke about. The new international is decentralized. It's not like the old idea. Remember, the Internationale did not save the human race. Right? Didn't we say so? I don't know the German, we sang it in English, so, the Internationale will save the human race. What happened? What happened? this, what I'm talking about. You can't do it through paying union dues. I adore trades union. I'm not against them, but they're insufficient, and globally they're racist against outsourcing. And I'm not for outsourcing either, but for another reason, because somehow labor is defined as cheap. That's why it's outsourced. Labor ain't cheap. Think it through. You know it, why labor is called cheap. Why, Nokia was paying in India the workers 45% less, and still they felt, oh, they're really paying us so well. Where does this come from? So to an extent, when in Genoa they tried to make global union movement, what happened? They couldn't do it because of the labor aristocracy, because of the fact that there is, of course, sexism, as we heard from our colleague, that has been undermined, and it's wonderful that in Poland it's working. In New York too, there is, but when you think of the world and the permanent casuals who are generally women, it's not, Korea is a little bit better in the global context. That's not the way in which we are going to create a desire globally to join together in order to be that kind of decentralized new international model based on inclusive education, permanent with every generation, rather than ending with theses. We have to remember that Marx, wonderful man that he was still in his training a 19th century humanist. He was wrong about human nature. He thought the epistemological change that the worker had to make, which a big, difficult change, was to think of himself or herself not as victim of capitalism, but as agent of production. That's his word, right? But he made a mistake when he thought that if they owned the means of production, they would want to use surplus value, just enough for themselves and then for social justice. He did not see that, because that was not the view that they had of human beings. See, and so therefore I would say that you have to go beyond the idea of establishing definitions, which you will anyway. So I will also say that in order to when I go to thesis 5, for example, or thesis 4, that gender relations are, of course, relations of production. That's where Frigga stopped. I think it's extremely important to remember this, that gender relations are relations of production, but they are also incalculable. See, just as I said before, that there are limits to the work that we can do as feminist Marxists, that makes our work stronger. Rather than ignoring them and saying that's individualistic, that's too subjectivistic, or whatever the words are, we cannot forget that they're also incalculable. Because, we could sit here for 2 or 3 hours, and one could talk about the incalculability of gender. And this is why there is transphobia. This is why there's, you talked about dismantling of the subject, because the transgender actually begins to show us the dismantling of the subject. It's a very scary thing. That's why there's transphobia, and it's bigger than the work of feminist Marxism. It's bigger than because it actually exists in communism, capitalism, pre-capitalism. On the other hand, there are also ways of, and this is something I don't know if you've noticed, for the very long, I don't know what to say about that fear, because for the longest time, I've been trying to grapple with something which I have called originary queerness in the areas where I work, which is completely free of all of this discourse. They've never, I mean, like I say, they've never been to Calcutta. You think they can imagine this room, and yet they're very smart. Not all of them are smart. My teachers are smart. My teachers are smart. So therefore, I would say that that's one of the reasons where transphobia comes from. And I cannot see Marxism and feminism only as resistance to the dominant science of legitimation. If I dismiss bad Marxism as not Marxism, and bad feminism as not feminism, then I would not be able, see, I was falling asleep as I was writing. So then I would not be able to be in this room. Bad Marxism, those are not Nebengeschäfte. Bad Marxism is also Marxism. And bad feminism, which God knows one has seen, if you are involved with the corporate leaders of Goldman Sachs, etc., saying, you know, I'm asked, because I teach at Columbia, I'm constantly asked to go to feminist conferences where corporate feminism is discussed and praised and so on. And if you say, and also among younger women, post-feminists, because feminism has done all the work, if one thinks of these as Nebengeschäfte, then we are lost. It is part of things to go bad, which is why things have to be persistent and permanent, and generation by generation. So it comes two ways. One is in the movement itself, the other in the fact of the event of each generation being born fearful, violent, and greedy. So, I mean, even I want this for my son is one of those greedy things, right? It sounds good. And then, you know, all of the foundations that you have to list. Remember last time I gave a talk saying outside in the funding machine? So, you know, we have to think about those things and not just say Marxism and feminism are resistance to dominant science of legitimation. That's thesis 5. And then the question, you know, what is man? What is woman based on this kind of situation? This has to be rethought. So I'm not going to go to it in great length, but I will say, if I ever get to a primitive accumulation, that
might still happen.
They might still happen. I mean, yes, I think next 10 minutes I'll go there. I'll forget everything else. So I will suggest that the Anthropocene is the relationship between reason and the rational. You cannot fall back on reason, because reason is, as we well know, in our private lives and our public lives and our meetings and our conferences and our collective and the collective behavior of good people, reason is the best grounding error that we can use. We have nothing better than reason, but reason is extremely fragile. And it's very fragile, it gives way all the time. You cannot use it as a weapon. The reasonableness is not a weapon, it's something that you must protect. And the rational is outside of you. I'm not an idealist, but the rational is like algebra. You know, it's outside of you. So the rational is like, well, mathematics as such, not arithmetic, but nonetheless, you try to teach algebra to very poor children, and the first time they realize, you know, class 5, 6, that -2 is not just you take 2 away from something, but a thing in itself. That's the introduction of the rational, which is outside. It's because you can't, it's not a real thing. It's a real introduction into phenomenological behavior rather than, and that's Marx. Nothing in Marx, if you read carefully, Marx was haunted by Hegel. He wasn't a Hegelian, but the idea of the phenomenological comes if you understand the difference between reasonableness, fragile. I mean, what can I tell you? I really should go to primitive accumulation. The idea of the subject having these Vorstellungen, which is kind of reasonable but not really good. They're not correct. They're not real concepts, right? You have to conceptualize in order to move forward. Hegel was making these corrections while he was dying. Those are his last corrections of the phenomenology in the encyclopedia where he's teaching. And that is so much in Marx's notion of the revolutionary subject. I mean, there is an anecdotal definition that we all know. But that anecdote connects, it's the only place where Marx talks about the content of a revolution because it happened in his own time, 18 Brumaire. But the definition of the revolutionary subject is someone who has learned a foreign language so well that when actually he doesn't say he, but so let's say when they use that language, they forget the language rooted in them. That's the definition that's the only description of the revolutionary subject that Marx ever gives. So to an extent, we have to remember this business about not always relying on what is natural in our reason. So you cannot intersect here. Frigga and I certainly agree. Think of how the desire for abortion is constituted when there is no social security. If one can imagine, and I don't have to imagine this, I'm with these people, I will be with them on the 19th. The way one imagines these places and also where in Africa I work, that's also below the NGO radar. So that's in those areas, one has to have children because there is no social security. And how much worse it is when there is desire for abortion in the women. There must be. Abortion is not, in fact, class fixed. It is an access to sociality for a certain class. But what happens there, it turns into femicide. That we have to change that. We have to be able to imagine that. We have to, the wonderful example of this kind of critique is Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's a story about a femicide. So to an extent, we have to be able to imagine that how shall we think in terms of surrogacy and its capitalization? The children must be produced where there is no social security. The desire for abortion is constructed as femicide here. How do Marxist feminists of the large developed countries intervene here? Not as target practice. I hear this all the time. Statistics are good, but remember, the statistical average person does not exist. That is arithmetic and division. Does not exist. So and statistics can be falsified so bad, I could give you 100 examples. Not reading in books, but from my own experience of these very poor places. So therefore, the idea of how one would, one meets a target. I mean, I see this at my university, which wants to ace the United Nations and wants to be a local service organization. So you devise your own targets. It's problems you can solve in 5 years. Yeah, we are working with problems that can only be solved in the philosophers of the future, and even then, they are, as I'm trying to tell you, these things will happen again. It doesn't change simply with a change in state formation. It doesn't happen only with electing the right people. That's a very good thing. I'm not rejecting it. Good policy is a good thing, but one has to realize that this is a condition that will repeat itself. That's why I was talking about permanence. So if you choose problems that you can solve from top down in 5 years, and then you say we met all our targets, it's not target practice. Activism is not target practice. So I'm saying that's also something that I have to say. And again, quoting 18 Brumaire, I mean, one can't forget that Marx's remark about the content of the proletarian revolution of the 19th century. You all know this here, but let me quote it again. What is Marx's remark about the proletarian revolution of the 19th century? The content. What is it? Someone whispered something. Anyone knows? Come on. It's the poetry of the future. And he does not use the fashionable word made fashionable by Goethe, Dichtung. No, he uses the old Aristotelian word, poesie. Do you think he's joking? If you think he's joking, you're wrong. I've written a great deal on it, and I invite you to read that stuff. Okay, so so this is most important. What we need to do is, if we internalize these theories and if they inform our practice, so I think theory is normed by practice. If they inform our practice, as in sports, we can report every 2 years or stay in touch because we need to. This is the new international, as it were. So, I'm not in touch with anybody. Nobody writes me. I'm doing what I'm doing. But nobody writes me, nobody calls me. They love me when I'm giving talks. Well, what is different? There's an academic thing that they love you and Gayatri Spivak really talked well. But then forget it as you are going towards the parking lot. That's the way, right? So therefore, but if you internalize these things, if you read theory as if it's a creative writing thing, so that, as in, sports, you don't follow up by thinking, oh, now I must follow up. Then you would never be an athlete. So the muscle memory is what we really require in looking at theory. Internalize it so that it informs your reading. You can't help being a feminist Marxist, rather than thinking, I must follow this thesis, and now this thesis. Is it correct? And we had even a very class fixed thing. 5 more minutes and I've hit an hour. We had a very class fixed thing. If something would not be quite theoretical, and we would say theoretically correct. We'd say, that is lumpen. In Bengali, right? Ekdom lumpen. You understand? So this is, anyone understand Bengali here? No, that's fine. I don't care. Anyway, so primitive accumulation. Oh boy, where does it come? Anyway, so what I say is then you can make connections. Let's see the poster. See, because of later. See, because of Maria Molinari here, I was able to make connections, and I held this thing. Make it bigger if you can. I held this thing in, and you see who all talked. You see, so the Latin Americans actually came and talked to us. We had a town hall. Why? Because of connection made here. And so then you can, in fact, make connections, and the desire for abortion was able to make that connection. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Teresa Valletta, but I don't think I'm going to do that, because I think I now really only have 5 minutes. Let me say what I was going to say about primitive accumulation. Yes. In the United States, at least, it is now politically correct to mention pre-colonial proprietors of land. Now, the idea of primitive accumulation, I'm not going to talk about the relationship between Rosa Luxemburg and Marx, but the idea of primitive accumulation is the turning of land into property. That's how one can actually begin to move towards industrial capitalism. Marx writes in great detail about this, and he remains unchanged from 1844 to 1864, because the economic and philosophical manuscripts are almost exactly the same words as the sogenannte primitive ursprüngliche Accumulation at the end of Capital One. But at any rate, now, so this arises out of the transformation of land to property, okay? That's why I said this in my abstract. In the United States, as I say, it is now politically correct to mention pre-colonial proprietors of land. If I may see the second thing. Can people read? Make it bigger. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is situated in, it says, I'm reading what it says, in Lenape-Hocking, homeland of the Lenape diaspora, and historically a gathering and trading place for many. They're giving the whole history without knowing of pre-capitalist trading and then into capitalism, colonialism, and trading place for many diverse native places who continue to live and work now on this island of Manhattan, who continue to live and work on this island. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all indigenous communities. Jesus wept. Anyway, all indigenous communities, past, present, and future, for their ongoing and fundamental relationship to this region, not to land, to this region. The diaspora, like Subaltern and Africans, were the Lenapes, handwriting. The Lenapes, like Subaltern Africans, were multilingual. And Lenape itself, like Yoruba, is a collective singular noun for multiplicity. What is it simply to say, we are sitting on your land, but we respect you? It might not be enough to appoint the brilliant new associate curator, Patricia Marroquin Norby Purepecha, and to include Native American objects, quote, now defined as art. The work of reparation and restoration of land grabbed illegally, grabbed by the colonizer, has been, however, going on long before this became politically correct, going on for some time. Once again, we are witnessing in West Asia how brutal the consequences of such work can be. And today, this land restoration can be part of the climate change movement. The assumption that the land should go back to the legitimate owner still keeps it within the rule of property. If we move to subalternity, to places in the world where technology has not made agriculture male dominant, way below the NGO radar, we will find that women undertake most of the heavy work of sowing and reaping. And these places are not small little corners. We imagine that every place the agriculture has been completely technologized. That is not so. The heavy work of sowing and reaping, much of the harvesting, the husking, the drying, the storing, etc. Since most subaltern agriculture is sharecropping, an extended discussion would have to nuance these statements. But one thing is certain, be it in the savannas of Africa or the gondograms of West Bengal, the women in general are not aware of their nation state, not even its name. The savannas of Nigeria, I'm speaking from personal experience, speaking unsystematized vernaculars. these women, they did not know the name Nigeria. Even as at Brown University, I was quite correctly celebrating Chinua Achebe. It's just the divisions are incomparable. So you have to remember that these are women, and the primary accumulation is happening, but not necessarily for themselves. So not even its name, nor of the next division, province or state. I mean, the women in West Bengal, for example, do not know the name Paschim Bongo, which is the local name of West Bengal. Forget India. So the subalternist feminist has 3 tasks, okay? So the first one is 43, number 1, okay? Where is my first one? First one. Yes. The first one is, of course, the teaching that I was talking about. But then the second one, let me describe the second one, is to bring to the subalternist the cartographic world, to bring to the subaltern indigenous a real sense of the cartographic world, rather than dwell on the fact that most indigenous languages, although they have a word for world, they do not have a word for colonization and exploitation. That's very nice, but the idea of the world has to be brought in. Can you show the video? 1 minute. And so we are doing this actually. This is now, as soon as we see, no, the last one. Okay, now there is in the corner a little thing, a play sign, the left corner of the video. Go up to the video and the left corner, down below, left corner, down below. Just a bit more down, You'll see a little play sign. Bring the whole thing down. There we go. See, we see any kind of video which will appeal to them, and we have them subtitled. Okay, this is Bengali subtitle. Make your things. The mic.
I'm trying, but this computer is.
Okay, now let me see. Believe me, let me see, because I've taken so much time. There will be no discussion.
We still have time, actually, so no worries.
Okay, we're here, right? Okay, now. Bring it like that. Bring it down and.
I will.
You need to center the image to the slide.
What?
You need to center the image to the slide.
Come and center it. There. And then pull it down. Pull it down.
You see, we cannot see the whole thing.
I know.
I know. Wait. So if you're gonna say something, do it.
Okay. Wait.
Bring it down.
Also, if somebody really knows how to move it, please come.
Where's the slide?
They've never seen anything.
I mean, I was bringing it down on my computer, which is right here, but.
Przepraszam bardzo, ale może ktoś jest tutaj, kto...
Maybe there is someone who can handle this computer and can help us. And can help us change the settings.
Whatever...
That's okay, then someone else should do
Hold on,
it.
because
Come on.
is,
If you don't understand it, then
Can someone that speaks Polish come and help here? Because I don't see...
No, we're on the wrong
To
thing.
potrzebujemy.
We're on the wrong thing. Yeah, bring it down. Bring it up. Bring it up, it's too big.
Nie, trzeba
And
to
then
zmniejszyć,
the corner. There we go. Yeah, just press it.
No, it's too big.
No nie, bo jest za dużo. It's too big.
Mogę?
No.
Tak. Nie, sorry.
You know, I criticize my... Okay, good, thank you. So when we notice videos that can appeal to the subaltern folks, and don't be so amused, listen to what I'm saying. Listen to this later. Listen to what I'm saying. What is a congratulation for doing something completely normal? And anyway, so, I mean, I could do it on my thing. What about the mic? You can't hear anything. Wait. Oh, sorry, I use my finger because mine. Just go there. Go to the. No. Yes. Okay.
Disaster, which is why
Thank you.
climate change
So,
matters so
if
much
you
here. They also
find
watching
videos that
projections for
will
how much
appeal
sea
to
is gonna
subalterns
rise.
you know,
It's also why we'll probably need
subtitle them immediately. Like in a day, I produced the Bengali subtitles. Now, we are trying to do this for all of the subaltern languages of the world, so that, we're trying to raise money so that it can be a big collective project. All the indigenous languages of Latin America, all the indigenous languages, hundreds in Africa, etc. So now you can see.
So should we play this one?
Yes.
climate change. Well, some countries can afford gleaming steel structures like this. Most others can't.
You can't see the subtitles, but they exist. Yes.
On the coast of Bangladesh, back in 2009, we saw seawater pouring into this village. The flood was so deep, a boat was the only way for us to get around. And the only defense was a wall of mud that was broken. People were struggling to repair it. A human chain passing handfuls of mud to fill the gaps to try to hold back the sea. The big worry here, of course, is if the forecast of climate scientists are right and the sea rises even more, maybe by a metre by the end of the century, well, how on earth are these millions of people going to cope? While London is secure, the only refuge here was a narrow ridge. The people who've done least to cause climate change were suffering most from it. Life was far more precarious than I'd ever expected, and it was getting worse.
এইরকম পানি যদি শুনি যে কানে এইসব পানি উঠবে তাহলে আমার ভয় লাগে আমি তো বাঁচবো কিনা এ তো কোনো আশা নেই জীবনে কষ্ট লাগে খুব জন্মের কষ্ট জীবনে শান্তি নেই কষ্ট
So you can stop now, but you see, this is
all over the world.
I didn't do. Trying to say, you didn't see what he was trying to say, that he in London saw ahead of time steel so that London will remain safe. But on the other hand, and that is something that the subaltern can understand, especially since he's fairly respectful of the Bangladeshis, and some women speak like the intelligent human beings they are. So when we find this kind of stuff, we immediately, and remember, most of them are illiterate, but my teachers aren't, but my little students aren't. So when they come, the students can show off a little by reading the subtitles and so on. So it's a very good thing. And I would like to suggest, because I do it myself, I would like to suggest that this kind of a task can, what the first task is, 43, number 1. Do you see a number 1? Yes. Acknowledge that we cannot not be destructive of nature as physics. That's the first task. For we can make more than we need. That's the exercise. That is the home of the Anthropocene, which starts with the first planting. Our work is thus within a planetary limit rather than a triumph of goodwill. So that's the thing that we have to remember in primitive accumulation, that primitive accumulation is not capitalocene. Unfortunately, the human being is constructed. I've written about this since 1975. Scattered speculation, a question of value, that's where I began. The Marxist material definition of the human, superadequate to itself, material definition. Now, therefore, the human is incapable of not providing the home for, so we cannot be like fuses. We cannot, even as we must remember that we are also animals, animal in a good sense. Remember what I think about human beings. Even as we must remember that we are also animals, we cannot, in fact, the primate animals also can't do it. They also, in fact, make more than they need. So, but that's a much bigger idea. But this thing that we cannot not make a home for primitive accumulation. In other words, man is to an extent made, a woman too, made to destroy. If one knows that, then one can work within that limit so that there is, so you see how I'm trying to, and remember it's mostly women's work. I told you about that reaping, sowing, etc. Now what I wanted to end with was my third task. You talked about subaltern studies, and I'm very critical of subaltern studies, although I certainly participate there. But subaltern studies was led by a person who was not basically a feminist, a brilliant historian, but I've written a very long obituary essay in Bengali, but you won't be able to read it. It's been published already, where in fact I present respectful critique of Ronald Guha, who was the leader of the thing. Now, I'm reading from an English essay that I wrote on him while he was still alive. He was almost 100 when he died. This is a few months short, 3 months short of his death. Of late, I have thought of the task of an activist involvement with the historical by way of the humanities beyond the disciplines, taking the practice of learning as picking up a relay from the earlier historical texts, practice of learning. The real work of catching the relay in diverse ways and running with it, forever surprising, will come from a collectivity that is in the future, anterior, beyond my grasp. You see, I'm repeating what I've said before. I have understood Du Bois, upon whom I'm working, I hope everybody knows his name in this room. Often in Europe, people don't know W.B. Du Bois's name, which is a scandal. I've understood Du Bois within a general understanding of history as relay, and here quote from the message he left with his wife Shirley Graham in 1957. He was a communist, by the way, 6 years before his death, almost went to jail as a result, McCarthy. 6 years before his death, to be read out at his death. I quote, "What I have done well will live long and justify my life. What I have done ill or never finished can now be handed on to others for endless days to be finished, perhaps better than I could have done. And that piece will be my applause." So that's a relay. Let us close with, Ranajit Guha said, such an item for a relay. It is the relationship between physiocracy. Physiocracy is nature as property. Physiocracy is land as property. 18th century thinking. Physiocracy and imperialism, as reflected in the inspired study of the permanent settlement in A Rule of Property for Bengal, my first book by Ranajit Guha, staging the physiocratic principles of Sir Philip Francis, by which agricultural policy in West Bengal was moved, my home state, was moved from, quote, farming to, quote, property. Fantastic stuff. And this relationship still exists. Recently, in connection with the new imperative to consider climate change, I had been teaching Marx's peculiar devotion to species life, where nature, I quote, is the human being's inorganic body, and he must remain in a standing process with it if he is not to die. This is what we can bring back into the climate change thing, rather than going through for species life, which is a species being, which is becoming human. This in the economic and philosophical manuscripts, notes taken when he's 25 and 26. In these manuscripts, he has an account of the transformation of subsistence farming into land as agricultural property in 15th century England, which is transferred almost unchanged to the chapter on so-called primitive accumulation in Capital Volume 1, written 20 years later. Primitive accumulation is the transformation of farming land into property. He has other examples, Marx. Those are hothouse examples, not the regular systemic example, which is this transformation of farming land into property, making way for mercantilism and finally industry. Here, Marx pays careful attention to physiocracy. Indeed, there is an entire section on physiocracy in Theories of Surplus Value. Indeed, his only problem with physiocracy is the theoretical status of ground rent. In the consideration of primitive accumulation, Marx's comments on imperialism as a hothouse way of advancing political economy and his fragmented comments on the indigenous lack of interest in land acquisition can, I think, pick up a relay in Ranajit Guha's subalternist rich account of how it goes wrong in colonialism and in the very last sentence of his second introduction in 1981, also in post-coloniality. As you have seen, I want to pull this away from our physiocratic legacy. When I say our here, I'm talking about India and West Bengal. Our physiocratic legacy, agribusiness as development, into undoing its seeming greening, land acknowledgement. I want to pull that thing away, and so this was a little bit more organized than my just talking. This is reading written stuff, but that's also a big task. So what we need is an unbelievable epistemological change. Undo this, even all of this activism of land grabbing being undone, so that the real proprietors come in and plant into a realization that we are being now run by a system that, because of the uncontained greed of the capitalists, because in fact, as you look at every meeting, and this smart capital means nothing, green capital means nothing, because it sustains cost effectiveness rather than think about primitive accumulation undone this way. We have to be able to think that everything was established on what we can only call commons. That's a way of rethinking feminist Marxism, which must go on at the same time as the short-term tasks that you must follow within the state in terms of policy. So you talk about Poland, you talk about Germany, you talk about different places divided in their silos doing feminist Marxism because conditions are different. You have to, at the same time, think of something to which the system that's now running us, its human accountability is trivial. Copernicus, Platonic solids, you name it, nothing. The Great Wall of China, the Sphinx's gaze, nothing. So that at the same time, we must be able to be strong enough to think the two together rather than establish definitions that you can follow and then say, hey, in my state, we are good now. It's good. We want to hear that. It's very good, but it's absolutely not enough. And that way, you will never have an international movement. For that, you need the new international model, the decentralized model, the model where the person who can't read Polish can't change the little technology. See, the world's wealth of languages, we have to think of that as an advantage rather than in the development lobby, which thinks it's an inconvenience. So I'm sorry I've spoken so long, but it's because I really like talking here. I wasn't invited. You know? Thank you.
Thank you, Gayatri.
So do we have any time?
Yeah, absolutely. We planned to be here until 8 p.m., right? I'm looking at you, Czesław.
Oh, then I could have talked more.
No, because we also wanted to give the opportunity to our guests to do a Q&A.
Yes.
So if you agree with that, let's maybe collect some questions. So if anyone has a question or comment, please raise your hand. And in the meantime, so you guys are doing that, right? So the nice men over there are handing us the microphones. So please raise your hands. And then in the meantime, I'm going to just give a little bit of appreciation to something that I'm not sure whether you did consciously or whether it happened in the speech but I believe it was probably very conscious, which is to change from Marxist feminism into feminist Marxism.
Absolutely conscious.
And I absolutely love the idea of actually sort of recolonizing Marxism rather than trying to persuade that we might have Marxist feminism. So basically, feminism should not adjust. It should be Marxism that should.
And you know, Marx is my brother. I mean, I'm not saying anything where I'm making hostile criticisms like he's a racist, he's not a feminist, he had a child by his maid, etc. That kind of stuff is, I think, childish nonsense. We don't go to Marx to learn about racism. He was not really racist if you read his stuff on Jamaica. He used words that we don't approve of anymore. But so I'm very fond of Marx. He's just not my guru. He's not my saint. You know, I will not follow him everywhere. So, you know what I mean?
I believe that there is a question, so
Yeah.
let's...
Thanks. I actually have 3 questions that I will try to...
Where are you?
I'm here.
Yeah, if you would please tell me who you are and what you do.
My name is Beatriz Toscano. I'm a Spanish scholar based in Germany. I work in the area of urban studies, and that's why I thought your talk was
You teach at a university?
I teach at the university.
Which university?
Hochschule Düsseldorf, Polytechnische University.
Okay, I know it.
In the area of urban studies, and I try to, to problematize the idea of primitive accumulation in terms of urban space and disenfranchisement. So that's where I'm coming from. I have 3 questions. I try to be very brief. The first one is when you were comparing, or at least putting forward the necessity to subtract definitions from the premising capacities. On the other hand,
subtracting definitions from what?
From the capacity to be premises of facts. And on the other hand, and I was following you with that, I have to say in all modesty that I was thinking as well on that quote of, practices provoke ideas rather than ideas are inspirations for practices.
Okay, be brief though, because we don't have that much time.
So you made me question whether when Marx said that everything solid melts into the air, he was saying it with regret or with nostalgia, as opposed to, hoping for a world where arguments become less solid and more fluid and more decentralized. The second question I have is that whether you think that he used the word poetry instead of Dichtung or Gedichte, simply because he had the word poiesis in mind. And the third question I have concerning primitive accumulation is that, yes, I endorse your arguments against primitive accumulation, but I have to prepare myself for our detractors. And I think the term Lebensraum also contains an instance of recognition and of distribution, of course for the wrong reasons, but nevertheless. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe let's collect more questions
Yes,
if there are
yes,
any,
yes.
and then you will respond.
Can't do more than 3, so let's hear another one.
Hi, everyone. Dzień dobry. I'm Carolina Mosquera. I'm from Colombia, but I'm studying the PhD in sociology in the University of Warsaw. And my question is regarding this transnational feminist solidarity, and I was really kind of excited when you...
Excuse me, let me interrupt you for a moment. I was really not saying transnational. Transnational is a very different thing from, I was just using the old-fashioned word international.
Yeah.
So carry on.
Makes sense because my question is connected with if you are studying or identifying some connections regarding feminism from Latin America, sometimes called like the Green Wave, and also some international efforts here in the leftist parties. There's like this Progressive International, but I wanted to ask if there are some efforts in that way regarding feminism, since right now, like 25th of November is coming, and Latin America is a big date to commemorate the day against all forms of violence against women, but not from a neoliberal perspective, but inspiring the Ni Una Menos and, you know, the movement that you were exposing there. So I want to ask if there are some, you know, like efforts at international level, and if you could expand more on that international feminist solidarity. And thank you for your conference.
Okay.
There's, I think, one more.
Yes, one more.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was indeed fantastic. I have a question, a brief
Where
question.
Are you?
I am the one that doesn't read Polish.
Oh, okay. No, you and me both.
So I have a question. I would like you, if you could unpack a little bit your notion of decentralizing, particularly when one thinks about the commons, because the idea of the commons tends to be more, in my understanding, networking and concentrating, and I am not seeing how you're thinking about it in a decentralized way. I understand the multilingualism and I understand the plurality and all that, but I want to know what of the commons is not the same as talking about, say, the public or the collective or something that is more centralized.
Okay, wonderful question. And I forgot because I couldn't see you, who you are and what you do.
I'm Chilean Italian and I live in the Netherlands. I teach at the university. I'm a sociologist. I work at Leiden.
You teach at a university?
Yes.
Okay, so see, we're getting academic questions. This is why I'm questions from academics. This is why I'm myself an academic, so that one answers differently, right? I'm so used to speaking at very different things. The rallies that I speak at, some are full of illiterate people who are getting shot to death. And that, you don't speak to them in the way you speak to fellow academics. That's why I ask. Anyway, I mean, I didn't hear a student either. These are professors. Okay, so putting forward, subtracting definitions, etc. But you see what I don't know, everything solid melts into air. I don't know how I would put it. I mean, certainly in our way of reading commentaries here, one has read it as regretful, right? Do you agree? On the other hand, because we also have this kind of presupposition, and of course we always think Marx must share our presuppositions, right? You know, which is nonsense. He was very counterintuitive. So, I mean, you should be in the United States to see how they completely romanticize anti-capitalism and call it Marxism. But this living labor, dead labor, and so on, sounds good, but Marx wasn't a guy like that. But you have to really read him as if he is writing a book rather than just agreeing with you. So it seems to me that when one looks at Marx's repeated exhortations that labor is not real, that ground is not real. You want examples from me? I will give them to you, not because I teach teach Marx, right? And so that they are forms of appearance, which is, of course, Erscheinungsformen, which that's how you understand the fight against capitalism. So this phenomenological approach, I don't think it would necessarily be a regretful remark. In order for me to give you an intelligent answer, we would actually have to look at the text, because I'm a literary person and I don't like summarizing and controlling a text with my little head when there is a gigantic intelligence writing. But I should give an answer, so I gave an answer. And so, as for poesie, I was thinking about Aristotle, because Aristotle's wonderful remark in Poetics that poetry is philosophoteron, more susceptible to knowledge or the love of knowledge than history. He was taking a kind of limited view of historiography as predicting, whereas poetry prefigures. And so, whereas predictions can be wrong, prefigurations are not right or wrong. And Marx knew his Aristotle. Remember, his PhD was in Greek stuff, right? He knew his Aristotle backwards, and he really loved Aristotle. About Aristotle, he writes in Capital, Volume 1, first chapter, that Aristotle could think everything that I think, except he could not think the value form, because he was in a slave economy, he was not in a capitalist system. That's why he couldn't think the value form. Everything else, yes. So that's why I think you're right. He's thinking about Aristotle in that way. He's not going to go the romantic way of Goethe. And so the Lebensraum. Yeah, Lebensraum is not a bad word. I think it's a fine word. And I was not against primitive accumulation. I was being descriptive. I was, in fact, describing ourselves. I'm extremely, tragedy for us is the best genre, supposedly, for us Europeanists. This is not true of the whole world, but nonetheless, I'm trained to be a Europeanist. So I use what I have. So the thing is that to move with tragedy, the awareness that we are bound to be primitive accumulators. And today, that is not a great thing. So, it's all right. Tragedy brings out the best in you. And I was saying, it leads to a much stronger practice than just top-down philanthropy constantly and calling it activism, helping the global south. The global south really loves the fact that you folks are helping us, but the thing is really true. So therefore, that's what I was saying. I was not against primitive accumulation, and Lebensraum is certainly a very fine word. Okay, so now Latin America. You asked, actually Lebensraum was someone else's question, wasn't it? The Latin America thing, well, I thought that I showed you my thing. Do you want to show it again? Should we? Yeah, just show it. Just the second one. No, the third one. Third one. Not that. No, it was shown second, but it's the third one. Yes. You see, I was just talking about, I'm very close to, I think all of these people, the Latin Americans, the Polish, I think they're all international. But I think that international connections have not been made. I mean, if you, that's that, and Frigga and I are kind of together there, the intersectionality business. To earn intersectionality, rather than this nice bringing together of people and really being together, talking together and being influenced, etc. See, it's so class fixed. Internationality is so absolutely class fixed. And it's no use saying my origins are working class. It almost works the other way. If you are international today, intersectional today, then the fact that your origins were working class means nothing. You've been upwardly class mobile. So internationalism today is a mark of upward class mobility constructed by, see, we all spoke in English. So therefore, I mean, when I say, does anybody in the room understand Bengali? I'm not being sentimental about my mother tongue. Everyone has mother tongues. But on the other hand, it's a factual thing because most of the Bangladeshi immigrants would not come to this kind of a thing. No internationalism. So therefore, I would like people to acknowledge, I mean, I'm also in this room, aren't I? I would like people to acknowledge that there is internationality, but it's a class-fixed internationality. And in order to make it something other, and that's why I was talking about decentralized, we have to be aware of language training. That, I'm from the United States. We are so monolingual. We do not understand anything. So, and even at Research One universities, the top administration says there is no demand. They've not heard of marketing in other areas. They certainly do marketing, but they excuse themselves for doing a hatchet job on the humanities and stopping language learning by saying there is no demand. So therefore, I would say that this kind of, I wish I could talk about the work that I do in Latin America for these unsystematized indigenous languages, and very much more so in Africa. So to say that, in a little way, one is trying to, my activism is very small, but very deep focus, very deep focus, so that it's deep focus, limited internationalism, rather than claiming that we have touched every country in the world. So internationalism is good, I recognize. Okay, commons, you know what I was meaning by commons, right? I meant common land. I wasn't using it in the idea of networking. Networking for me is good for the short-term tasks, which are very, very important, state-based, and like I was talking to the Asia Society about reimagining the museum. Okay, they want to bring more multicultural stuff. They want to make the people they appoint diversified, so not all of them are white men or white women. Not bad ideas, but these are short-term tasks. And for this, you have to network. But the network, I mean, I know a guy got the whatchamacallit prize, that big money prize, by saying that the world was a network world. What was his name? Alex Costello or something like this. Born the same year as I. But networking is also a very class-fixed thing, a little less class-fixed than internationality, because computer language now is completely lexicalized so that it's creolized computer language. You don't have to know English. You can creolize the origin. So therefore, networking is good, but networking for me is for those kinds of tasks. And by commons, I meant unowned land. By commons, I meant unowned land. Not old English, but I'm like a solid English word. That's what I meant. And that we are on loan on the earth, that the boundaries are fictions. So that's quite the opposite of state-based work. That's all.
I was wondering about one more question that I had all the time, which was about transversality. You were talking a lot about the definitions and the labels of good, bad Marxist, good, bad feminist, and suggesting, as far as I understood, that the reflexive work, but also the political work, happens across those distinctions. This is how I understood it. So my question is whether you embrace the notion of transversality, as for instance in Felix Guattari's Three Ecologies or in some other sources, or whether you would theorize it or define it, for that matter, in some other terms.
See, you took away my answer because of course, I won't theorize it. I don't embrace any notions. I find, when I'm doing my real work, which is teaching, it's like you've thrown me into water and I'm swimming somehow. I'm a baby. Because that's why I say I'm not a good teacher. It's hard for me to teach if I'm so far away from my students. In every way, I'm not like them. This is an awful thing. So I have to know my students' desires. See, my definition of teaching, which unfortunately has become a formula, people ask me to talk on it, uncoercive rearrangement of desires. So it's not actually my phrase. It's a quote from someone. I never tell anyone who it's from. But and now I see on Google, if you put the phrase, my name comes up. So anyway,
it's called appropriation. Yes.
Yeah, but it's worked for me. So therefore, I do not embrace any notion. I like some notions, but I actually recognize them as resonant. Something I read sometime. So yes, of course, but the fact of working across, yes, how could I not agree? You have to, as far as I can see in this room, I'm with people, not all of whom resemble me, but how is it that I want to work with them? Because, if you really want, which is why I'm so deeply critical of identity politics. And, people will say, here there's good support for people who look like me. So, God damn it, that's not the idea of equality. Equality is like people who don't resemble me at all are also equal, have the same rights. And people who don't agree with me at all. Democracy is a very hospitable...
You quoted Rosa Luxemburg. I just...
Well, listen. Rosa Luxemburg, one of these days I will speak about Rosa Luxemburg here. I hope you will invite me. But because that will be an invited lecture because, you don't speak on. Rosa Luxemburg, I have a picture of Rosa Luxemburg in my study. Huge... not picture, but a poster saying Rosa wrote, right? And you know where I bought it? I bought it in the shop of Daniel Cohn-Bendit. I'm old. Who knew what would become? No one knew the future. So it has a historical meaning in that picture. But there he is. So anyway, no, Rosa Luxemburg, absolutely, I quote her. And you see, I didn't mention her because I've internalized her. It came out as mine.
You see, so you're haunted by her. Let's define it again. So I would like to thank you very, very much for this keynote, which I think will inspire many discussions and many thoughts throughout our conference. I would like to also request that people who did not register at the registration point, please go there and register. And also whoever wants to take part in this picture taking with the hashtag ceasefire, however problematic the notion is, please come to the podium and we will make the... and also please help yourselves with coffee, tea and stuff. Let's thank to Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. Thank you very much.
Wonderful questions. That's why and for your patience, I'm applauding you.
I have a little gift for you.
Oh, thank you.
So we met 12 years ago in Wrocław, and I interviewed you. You probably don't remember. I put a bookmark here. This is the interview.
Oh.